Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Rakha Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 3rd Maccabees, the 5th chapter. So, as we read in the 4th chapter, right, the king basically, he gave out this decree, they rounded up the Jews all about, brought them to, right outside Alexandria, and he's like, look, they're all going to be tortured and then put to death. So they spent 40 days drafting a list of each Israelite and what's going to happen to them. Come to find out, they started to run out of materials, paper and pen, before they could even record all the Israelites. There were so many of them. So here we are in chapter 5. Then the king, completely stubborn and filled with extreme rage and bitterness, called for Herman, the elephant keeper. He ordered him to drug all the elephants, 500 in number, with heaping handfuls of frankincense and much unmixed wine on the following day. So he said, look, forget it. Forget this extra torture. We're just going to do it one way. So go and get the elephants, drug them up so they all they're in a rage, as it says, right? When the abundant quantity of drink had driven them wild, Herman was to bring them in so that the Jews might meet their doom. When Ptolemy had given these commands, he went back to his partying, having gathered those of his friends and of the army who were especially hostile toward the Jews. So his company were himself and obviously those that were in like mind and were angry and hostile towards Israelites. So he's partying with them. But Herman, the elephant keeper, promptly began to carry out the orders. The servants in charge of the Jews were out in the evening, went out in the evening, bound the hands of those enduring this distress, and arranged for their continued custody through the night. They expected that the entire race would come to a ruinous end, because they said, okay, he's clearly going to have them die by way of being crushed by elephants. So they thought, all right, basically they're about to meet their doom. To the Gentiles, it seemed that the Jews were entirely without refuge, since in their chains, distress surrounded them on every side. It looked like it was hopeless. But with persistent cries and tears, they all called upon their almighty Lord and merciful God and Father, who rules over every power. That's the Most High. Yahweh Ba'asham Yahushai. They continued to pray that he would turn away the evil plot against them and rescue them with a glorious display of power from their impending fate. So their prayer rose earnestly to heaven. Now, as we go through this book, keep in mind, right, that this shows you the many ways the Lord can deliver you. It's not always going to be like with Heliodorus, he sent angels down and they beat his ass. But the Lord can use many ways. And this shows you an example of that. Now, when Herman had made the savage elephants drunk, so that they were full of a great quantity of wine and drugged with frankincense, he came to the palace courtyard early in the morning to report to the king. But God sent to the king a portion of sleep, the precious creation from before recorded time, granted night and day by the one who gives it generously to whomsoever he wishes, that is, sleep. By the Lord's doing, the king was overcome by a most pleasant and deep sleep, such that he utterly failed in his unlawful purpose and was completely cheated out of his stubborn plan. He basically slept through it. The day that he was supposed to, all right, now I'm going to give the go-ahead, and then you're going to, I'm going to tell you what the next thing you're going to do with these Jews are. He ends up falling asleep. And the Jews, having escaped the announced hour, praised their holy God and again prayed that the one who is quickly reconciled to his people, which is the Most High, would show the might of his exceedingly strong hand to the arrogant Gentiles. So, say Ptolemy had said 9 a.m., that's the death sentence. Then he falls asleep and he sleeps basically throughout that whole time. So they can't go ahead with the plan because they need him to be awake and to sort of give the go-ahead. So the time passes and the Jews start praising the Lord and start begging him to show his power and deliver us. When it was almost the middle of the 10th hour, now the 10th hour here would be around 4 p.m. our time, right? Because the third hour is 9 a.m. The sixth, that's from 6 a.m., right? The third hour is 9 a.m. The sixth hour is 12 p.m., noon. The ninth hour would be 3 p.m. and the 10th hour would be 4. That's in our time. So right around that time, the person in charge of the invitations, seeing that the guests were gathered, because what Ptolemy had planned was this would be a show, right, for those who hated the Jews to come and watch them die in the hippodrome by being crushed by elephants. So all these guests are there, as it says. The one in charge of the invitations, he sees the guests are gathered. He approached the king and nudged him. After waking him with some difficulty, he informed him that the time of the banquet was already slipping by, and gave him an account concerning the matter. The king, after considering this, returned to his drinking and commanded those who were present at the banquet to recline across from him. So he's just like, look, you know what? He just woke up. The first thing he's thinking of is going right back to his drinking and his mirth lifestyle. When this had been done, he urged the guests to give themselves over to feasting and to make up for the lost time by celebrating all the more now. After the party had been going on for some time, the king called Haman in and asked him with angry threats why the Jews had been permitted to remain alive through the present day. But Haman pointed out that he had fully carried out the orders at night, and his friends confirmed his story. So the king, with a savagery worse than that of the tyrant Phalaris, said that the Jews could be grateful for today's sleep. But tomorrow, he said, without delay, prepare the elephants in the same way for the destruction of the unseemly Jews. So he calls Haman. He says, "Yo, didn't I tell you that you did prepare the stuff?" He's like, "Yeah, I did everything, but you kind of were asleep." So the king is like, "You know what? They may have gotten me today because of sleep, but tomorrow they're done. All right. Tonight, drug those elephants, and tomorrow is going to be their destruction." So the king spoke, and when all those present gave their unanimous approval readily and joyfully, they all departed for their own homes. But they didn't spend their night sleeping so much as devising all kinds of insults for those who seemed to be doomed. So rather than going to sleep, they were so excited that they were instead coming up with insults and bywords and all manner of evil things to say against the Jews while witnessing their destruction. By dawn, when the roosters began to crow, Haman had outfitted the beasts and started them moving along in the great colonnade. Crowds of people from throughout the city gathered for the most sorry spectacle and were eagerly awaiting the early morning. The Jews were at their last gasp since time was short. With tearful prayer and mournful sounds, they stretched out their hands to heaven and begged the supreme God to help them again quickly. Before the rays of the sun were scattered across the sky, meaning the sun rose, when the king was receiving his friends, Haman approached him and invited him to come out, indicating that the king's desire was ready to be put into action. So he basically goes up to him and says, "Look, I set up the stuff. The animals are ready and we're all set. We're all set to go." So he tells that to the king. And when he heard this, the king, that is, the king was surprised at the unusual invitation to come out of the palace. He's like, "Wait, why are you inviting me outside the palace? The hippodrome for what?" He was completely overcome by confusion, and he asked what it was that they had worked so hard to prepare for him. So it's like he completely forgot what the plan was. He had amnesia. He's like, what's going on here? Like, what preparation? What preparation? Like, what do you mean? Everything is set. What? Now this was God's doing. The God who is Lord over all things, who had placed in the king's mind forgetfulness of the schemes that he had previously devised. Going to show you, there's so many ways the Lord can deliver you. To the point where even here, in this case, the one who had these evil intentions against Israelites forgot it. He didn't even know what was going on at this point. Haman and all the king's friends pointed out The beasts and the forces have been prepared, your majesty, according to your careful plan. But at these words the king was filled with extreme wrath because of the providence of God had scattered every thought of his concerning these matters. So the the Lord messed with his mind so much that he's like, I don't like he's pissed now. Like, what are you talking about? Elephants being like, what do you mean? He glared threateningly at Herman and said, if your parents or children were here, I would have them prepared as a lavish meal for wild animals instead of the Jews. They are blameless as far as I'm concerned, and have demonstrated constant loyalty above all others toward my ancestors. He basically gave him the Biden effect. So he completely forgot that he was angry at the Jews. He forgot that he had planned to destroy them. He forgot all that. His mind just went back to a time when he had them in favor. So now he's mad at Herman for preparing for the destruction of the Jews. And now he's like, look, hell wrong with you. Indeed, if it weren't for the affection of our common upbringing and your service, or it wasn't for the fact that, we were basically, you could say childhood friends, or we were brought up the same, and, for you serving me, you would have been deprived of life instead of them. So Herman endured an unexpected and dangerous threat, and his eyes and face showed his dismay. So he was like, I mean, he wasn't going to talk back, but he was completely messed up in the head. Like, huh? But you told me, you angrily told me to prepare this, and I go and prepare this for your plan, and now you're threatening me. Whoa, what's going on here? Like, is the king okay? One by one, the king's friends slipped away sullenly, and the guests were dismissed, each to his own business. Because now they started to wonder, like, yo, I don't think he's good. He's in a good mind state right now. Let me fall back before he turns on me too. Now, when the Jews had heard about what the king had said, they praised God, the Lord, the King of Kings, who had made his power apparent in giving them this assistance. Now the king resumed the entire banquet according to the same rules and began inviting guests to return to their celebration. He summoned Herman and said with a threat, how often, you sorry creature, must I command you concerning these same matters? Equip the elephants yet again for the destruction of the Jews tomorrow. So 2 days now they've escaped. The first day he slept. The second day he had, dementia and amnesia. But then later on his mind comes back to him, and now he calls Herman again and he says, look, man, I'm not going to I'm not going to tell you again. Go and prepare those elephants for tomorrow's destruction of the Jews. But the king's officials who were reclining at the table with him were taken back by his unstable mind and began to protest as follows. So now they're like, all right, hold on. Something is not right. So they say, Your Majesty, how long will you test us? As though we were fools, giving an order a third time to destroy the Jews and again reversing your decisions. As a result, the city is in an uproar because of its expectation. Yeah, because they all come prepared. And then something happens, and then, oh, no, I guess it's not happening today. Then tomorrow they all come, and then the same thing. And now people are like, yo, what's going on? It is already swarming with mobs and is very much at risk of being plundered. That's how angry the people are, because they think you're playing games with them. At that point, the king, a Phalaris in every way, was filled with madness and gave no thought at all to the change of heart that had come about in him concerning the punishment of the Jews. Let's take a look at this word here. Oh, interesting. It says, this also refers to the notorious tyrant of Acragas in Sicily, Greece, famous for his invention of the brazen bull. So it's probably some um, um, a trait that he exhibits that made him comparable to this individual. It says, was filled with madness and gave no thought at all to the change of heart that had come about in him concerning the punishment of the Jews. He firmly swore an irrevocable pledge that he would send these people to the grave without delay, mangled by the knees and feet of the beasts. He said, "Oh, they are going to be crushed." He swore that he would march against Judea and swiftly burn it to the ground with fire and spear. Their temple, which he hadn't been allowed to enter, he would level with fire, ridding it forever of those who performed sacrifices there. Then the friends and officials departed with joy and confidently assigned the armed forces to the places in the city that were best for keeping watch. Now the elephant keeper drove the beast almost to a state of madness with the most fragrant drinks, namely wine mixed with incense, and he equipped them with frightful trappings. Around dawn, when the city was already filled with countless crowds moving towards the racecourse, he entered the palace and urged the king on to the matter at hand. So now he's prepared the elephants. They're going crazy. He comes to the king and says, "Okay, everything is set. We're ready." So the king, filled with rage, rushed out with all fierceness to join the beasts. He wanted to witness with steely heart and with his own eyes the painful and miserable destruction of the previously mentioned people, that is, the Jews. The Jews saw the dust cloud created by the elephants going out at the gate, and armed forces following them, and the marching of the crowd, and they heard the noisy ruckus. Thinking that this was their final moment of life, the fulfillment of their most wretched fear, they gave themselves over to pitiful wailing and weeping. They began to kiss each other, embracing their families, and throwing themselves upon each other's shoulders. Right? Basically, like, uh, forms of endearment and sorrow and mourning and that kind of stuff. Parents to children and mothers to daughters. Other women had their newborn infants at their breasts, drawing their last milk. Nevertheless, when they took into consideration the assistance that they had previously received from heaven, they took their infants away from their breasts and altogether bowed down. See, so as they were in fear, eventually they stopped and they remembered, like, wait, but the first day the Lord delivered us. The second day the Lord delivered us. So he's already showed us that he's on our side. So after this realization, verse 51, they cried with a very loud voice, pleading with the Lord of all power to have mercy on them by intervening, since they now stood at the gates of death. And that brings us to the end of the book of 3rd Maccabees, the 5th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Bracha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.